Hey everyone, this is Tom, and today I want to share how 3D printing can be beneficial to people who are into nature and wildlife. For example, my coworker, she modeled this pawpaw fruit out of clay, and then she painted it, and I think she did a really good job. You see, it's really hard to get live pawpaw fruits and preserve them and use them for educational reasons, other than when we're ready to eat them, because they disintegrate pretty much instantly. They're super perishable. So models are really good for interpretation and for nature education. But you know what? I'm horrible at making models. I'm terrible at art. I cannot put pen to paper. It's one of my major weak points. But I kind of am okay at technology. So we got a 3D printer for work here, and I 3D printed this pawpaw fruit. And I think it did a pretty good job. This is actually a real scan of a pawpaw that I printed. How cool is that? And I don't think one is better than the other. I just think it's a good tool if your skills are in other places. So if you are really good at modeling things out of clay and plastic and wood and things, that's fantastic. But if you're like me, 3D printing is pretty cool. I mean, a lot of this stuff here, you cannot buy from a store. I mean, look at Mr. Camaroceras here. I wouldn't be able to buy something like this. Believe me, I've looked. And when you do fossil programs for kids around here, from the Cincinnati fossils, the Ordovician, talking about bryozoans and brachiopods and even trilobites, it's not the most exciting topic in the world for them. But when you talk about like our apex predators, like our Camaroceras here, then it kind of excites them a little bit. I mean, these things can get 25 feet long when they were fully grown. How cool is that? They were absolutely monstrous, completely terrifying. This would have been just a little baby. And I 3D printed this pretty, well, relatively easy. I mean, this squid part right here was actually free on the Thingiverse website, and I can actually link to the download area below. And then I modeled this orthocone shell with a software called Blender, and then I just shoved them together. I mean, it took a little work, but this is probably the equivalent of about 1.5 rolls of filament, so maybe $20, $30 worth. If I would have tried to contract this out, probably been a little bit more expensive than $30. And there is no way I would have been able to model this myself out of paper mache and wood and wire and all that kind of stuff. It's just not my strong point. So 3D printing is really good for when you want to create stuff that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get at a store. You can also print things that you could get at a store, but would be very expensive. For example, Mr. T-Rex here, if I would have gotten this guy from a shop, it could have been $500, $600. It would have been more expensive than the 3D printer itself. So I decided to 3D print one. And the reason why I didn't want to spend the money on the actual model is this was kind of for a one-off program. It was 2020, and I was doing a virtual fossil program for middle schoolers. And if you know anything about middle schoolers, even Mr. Camaroceras here might not be super exciting. And when they think of dinosaurs, they think of big old Mr. T-Rex here. And I did manage to relate dinosaurs to the local wildlife of the area. I mean, if you know a little bit about dinosaurs, you know they are related to the modern birds of this era. And basically, a lot of scientists say birds are dinosaurs. And this is one of the reasons why. T-Rex had a wishbone just like our modern-day raptors. That's one of the many similarities between dinosaurs and birds in general. So I just think that's really cool. And what I can do is I can let kids muck with these things. I can let them mess with it. And, you know, obviously I don't want them to break it. But if they do, I can usually print out another one. For example, I printed out a little mini guy right here, which I think is kind of fun. So you can 3D print really weird stuff. You can 3D print stuff that would otherwise be expensive. And, you know, it's just really, really cool. I mean, look at Mr. Theodore Roosevelt here. I use him for our typewriter display downstairs. You know how expensive a bust of Theodore Roosevelt would be? I've also used him for our ghost program, so that's really fun. So 3D printing is really cool. However, there are some issues. For example, 3D printing now is kind of like owning a car in the 1920s. If you had a car back then, you wouldn't be able to just go in it, turn it on, and go to work. You had to make sure the brakes were working. You had to make sure the oil was full. You had to crank the thing. You had to know what the optimal pressure is, what the pressure gauge. You had to know every little bit about that car in order to use it properly. And that's what 3D printing is like. For example, our artillery sidewinder here, it does look nice. It's not a top of the range 3D printer by any means, but it looks really well together. However, I have had to replace both of the belts here. I've had to replace this center mount right here, and the wire that connects to the bed has actually got like a weak point in it, so I'm going to have to create a brace for that. So while it's a really cool printer, it does have its issues. For example, when I first got it, no matter what I printed, it would create these dimples in the skulls or whatever I would try and create, and I had no idea how to fix it. I mean, I used Reddit forums, I used YouTube, and while YouTube and Reddit and 3D printing forums, even on Facebook, are really beneficial, sometimes it just takes a lot of trial and error to find the issue. What the issue was for some reason there's something in the code in this 3D printer that prints too much plastic, so I had to reduce the flow in the software by 30% in order to create pretty cool things. I mean, now, look at Mr. Wolverine's skull. It's not perfect, but it's still kind of cool. So that is the problems with a pretty good printer. You can go the really cheap route, but then you have to really put in some work. For example, I love being a naturalist, I love being a wildlife educator, but I'm not going to be a millionaire anytime soon. But I like to 3D print for my personal hobby because I think it's kind of fun. So I bought a 3D printer on eBay for like $150, and it's this monstrosity of wires and belts and even clips. I may have stolen my wife's paper clips here to keep the bed together. And when I got it, the stop switch didn't work. I had to replace all the wheels. I had to replace the belts. And then when I finally did get it printing, the whole thing would shake. It would go do-do-do-do-do-do. Turns out all it needed was a software update. It needed new software, and now it prints actually pretty good. For example, I actually just printed this maple seed, and I think it did a pretty good job. And you know what? The nozzle on that thing is actually made for printing big and fast like these guys. So the fact that it could print this in this amount of detail, I think it did a pretty cool job. Oh, by the way, that's another thing about 3D printers. They can take a long time, and there are all ways to fix that. But that might be for another video, and I'll talk about that in a minute. One little caveat about 3D printing before I leave you today is there is the question of environmental cost. I mean, this is plastic, right? And we don't want to produce too much plastic in our ecosystem. The initial argument was that this plastic is PLA, which means it comes from corn. So technically it's biodegradable, but because of the colors and things, that's not as accurate as what some of the advertisers would like to say. But you know what? The environmental cost of 3D printing this versus buying it from Amazon, having it shipped and sent over here, I don't know. I actually haven't done the math on what would be a bigger environmental impact. And you can do things to try and reduce your environmental impact. For example, when you usually buy a 3D printer spool, it might be like this big plastic thing. And once you're done, then you've got this big thing of plastic on here that, you don't know what to do with. I actually save these, and I use them for stands, mostly, because here at the Great Parks, we have the highest tripod budget, basically a bunch of these things stacked on top of each other. And I use them for things like that. But another thing that you can use, which I think is really cool, this is a replaceable spool. So you can put a little Allen key in here and undo it, put a new spoolless roller filament on, and then you don't have to waste spools. I think that's actually kind of cool. And there's also recycled material 3D filament, which I recently purchased and going to try out. And there's also spools that are made from cardboard. So there are all ways to reduce your environmental impact. And then also, you can just be smart about 3D printing, right? Like, you don't want to 3D print things that are completely useless. I mean, Mr. Roosevelt here has been in use for about 2 years. Same thing with Mr. T-Rex here. And a lot of these, skulls are things that are going to be used for years to come. I mean, I do know, as I said, if they break, you can 3D print them, but you can also glue them back together. I actually had a coworker, I 3D printed out this thing called a Terror Bird for a coworker, and the legs broke off. But this plastic is really susceptible to super glue, and repairing 3D printing parts is actually relatively easy, so I think that's kind of cool. So I hope you guys had fun learning about how I use 3D printing for my job. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the nitty-gritty, how I'm gonna, how you use the software and all that kind of stuff, then I can create more videos, but it's up to you guys. So if you, let me know in the comments, that would be fantastic. If you would like to see a couple of my 3D printed creations, then I have a program coming up here at Sharon Woods eventually called Out of This World. And it's a space program, and this is a replica of the James Webb Telescope. I haven't finished it yet, but how cool is it that I got to 3D print a replica model of a telescope that's currently looking into the very beginnings of our universe? I mean, how fantastic is that? I think that's really cool. All right, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoyed my little video here, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. And, yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.